organizations aren't yet ready for the pace that comes with AI native delivery or what needs to come with AI systems. This client, big, regulated, had to do compliance. We raised 120 tickets for support needed. In a 6 to 9 month period, that's manageable. In 3 months, that's an awful lot. AI native delivery allows you to go quickly, but also test and get feedback. And the real sticky point of that there is software development hasn't gone at that pace before. And some people's view on production grade then feels like we do not spend 6 months hard testing this. Like, here's the evidence, we have tested it enough, but we're also not adding in all the bells and whistles from the get-go. You can build something, but does it make sense? Either the actual AI use case, or if you're building a custom app or a digital development, does it make sense from a business point of view? Just because you can do either one, how do you make sure the rationale behind it and the value is clear? Because yes, you might be able to build it in 3 months, but can you then maintain it?
Hello and welcome to another episode of Discussing New Approaches in AI, Data and Technology. I'm your host, Eric Walker-Rawson, founder of Talos Executive Search, and today in the hot seat I am joined by Josh Cozens, who is a principal consultant at We Build AI, which I think is fair to say, I looked up as an AI native solution building consultancy.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the main topic we're going to talk about today is how do you actually build AI? And I think you guys are in a really good position because you're in the weeds. You're seeing, I'm guessing from a lot of your experience, it's companies who have tried one way and now they're putting a bit of budget behind because they want to see, how it's actually done, what they can actually do. So I suppose a good question to start us off with is, when we say AI that actually works, what do we mean by that, especially in an enterprise setting or something along those lines?
Yeah. No, and we can zoom out a touch. So We Build AI, the consultancy, how we're set up, we want to build custom compliant production grade AI systems and solutions. And to do that, we're working with some of these clients that you call out there in, at the moment, financial services, energy, manufacturing operations. But then to make that enabled, we're also partnering with technology companies like Microsoft, AWS, and NVIDIA. And that then allows us to think about this AI that actually works. You need to understand a bit about the industry, but also the technology at play before you can even answer any questions. And the way we do that is, for a most recent engagement, we had 50 ideas. Sounds great, really impressive, but that doesn't move the needle. And we ended up with 3 that we actually built to get into production. So I can expand on in a moment, but I think that ratio alone says a bit about what works with AI.
Is that typical when you're working with clients where you have a big influx of ideas and then it's almost a problem to try and narrow them down?
There's 2 parts of it. Usually they like to have these big innovation strategy days. And there's a load of problems that get thrown out there and you think that's brilliant, that's great. But when you get down to how do we make this be executed and embedded into what people use, solving actual validated problems, there tends to be a disconnect. So the client we were working with most recently, Critical National Infrastructure, they wanted something that helped them understand how do we go into the particular market that we're working in, and based on the market become more competitive, which already is a really, really high, lofty goal.
Yeah, quite broad as well.
Exactly that. So for them, this client was based in the States, and part of what they do out there is they bid for, within the different states, there's these operators of the energy system, and they might say, hey, we want to upgrade this particular area or have a new capability, and they put out there an exam question, and there's lots of different operators that will bid for that piece of work. So how could they, using AI, was what we're trying to posit, get information about that faster, create responses quicker and at a higher quality, and more importantly, understand if any of our competitors are doing things in that space to make sure that we can differentiate with them, or potentially the double-edged sword, partner with them. So they might bring something we don't. It's a huge multi-billion dollar contract that they're looking after. So how do we bring that in so that we can be more competitive? So there's lots of different data sources that they wanted to do. That was the problem. And from those 50 ideas, we found 3 which actually would have helped them. 2 were AI powered. 1 was AI natively delivered. But then it uses AI to connect the 3 together. So they had this akin to a CRM solution where you can store all the information about the partners or the areas or the competitors. And then you can use the Model Context Protocol, MCP, to talk with the chat platform that we set up for them into that actual database. And that's where you've got the real AI that work for them, because you've got their data that's trusted and you've used it a very simple way to just point into that.
So I suppose what's the difference between sort of the AI powered
Yeah.
and the AI native? Because it's, again, the big differences there could
Yes.
be and how you choose those ideas from those 50 as well.
Yeah. So what they wanted to do was deliver something that worked, and ideally at pace. And so the AI powered is, how do you get something that delivers? So someone can say, hey, when did we last meet with so-and-so? What is the upshot of that meeting? What do I need to do next? And that's where the MCP integration can pull that information for them. But there's also how we built that, the underlying platform and the capability on top. We used a lot of what we call spec-driven development. And so what we do with that there is we can have sessions with the team to work out what their problem is. And then we can very quickly create a working proof of concept for them that can show what the user interface would look like, how they would interact with the data and the information that's being shown. But also we can then hand that over to the engineering team with very clear requirements and a working prototype to then productionize. And that's taking the infrastructure that lies underneath your Azure, AWS, and been able to connect that with the multiple layers up for what the users actually interact with. And that can now be done in the POC in about a week or so. You get the really fast iteration feedback cycles. So you know that what you're building is aligned with the user. But also because you've done it quickly, you get the compound view of, oh, I didn't even realize we could do this. I actually have this requirement. And now the double-edged sword of that is lots of stuff to build.
Is it almost you get to the sort of UX, UI elements quicker, where you get someone almost using it and they can... So there's always that element in the design process where someone, your end user, is using the product and they go, and it's the most annoying thing when you've built the thing and it comes to the end stages and they're like, oh, actually, I'd really like this feature, or this feature doesn't quite work for me.
Yes.
Or you realise in the user data and how they're using it, they're not using these features over here. They're just sort of sat quietly in a corner gathering dust.
No, it's exactly that. And so you have the classic agile delivery where you do sprint planning. We're basically, okay, over this next 2 weeks, we'll work on these items. And there's an overall balance of, we want to answer this big exam question, lofty, broad. That boils down into certain features or user stories. But now you can tie that to the proof of concept that we've built, and that will slowly iterate over time. And typically they want 10 things. In the time frame, you can build 6 or 7. And so you have that priority call of, we've built this, let's get testing, let's get feedback. We can either go further down this route and make that sharper and tighter, or we add a new capability or feature. And that's where being able to really draw out the value of what actually helps them. That's, I think, where the real, I guess, insight comes from. So what we've found really helpful is when they're using that there to be like, let's have a real scenario. You're now going to meet with this potential partner or competitor, or you need to do some market intel research. It's quite easy to do that, but what decision are you now going to make off the back of this? How is the team going to change what they're doing? That's the real test, and that's where you need both the doers and the directors coming together to test it. And the director's time is harder to get, typically tend to be busier, they're in more meetings. And so what we've had to do with them is to be like, let's have a small subset as a working group. We are co-creating this together. It's very deliberate what we build, that's for you. We know the AI, you know the industry. We'll partner together to make sure we do that. Up front, we need a little bit of time. So we set up meetings, placeholders in advance. And what that then enables us to do is to be like, here's the working version, or here's the first alpha release. Let's test it in anger. Let's see, is it doing what it was meant to do? And have you got more ideas off the back of that to include? And then we go back to the reprioritization. And what we found was, when we built this thing that was akin to a CRM, the relationship manager for them, they wanted to also have initially 2 other categories of organization. But they found that let's go stronger and deeper on that MCP part was more valuable for them. So rather than extend the database, let's find a better way to pull information from there. And then we've worked out that we could make charts and visuals for them. So they could be like, hey, in the last week or last quarter, whatever that time period was, how are we doing in this particular region? Are there instances where we've been more successful or less successful? Are there teams that need more support based on what we're seeing? And that meant that at the highest level, where they're deciding where to put resources, what opportunities to go after, they can get that just by talking into the platform when it points to that, rather than tracking more and more data, which is still valuable. You need solid data for that insight to be accurate. But they were finding that really with this, you were ending up in a situation where they were driving more decisions and they could go after more likely opportunities. And then that shaped it for them.
It almost seems like going back to data foundations, almost, where it's data decision making.
Yeah.
Almost where, 'cause I do see this the AI journey and the data journey being quite linked, where they are almost helping each other in a way. I suppose the natural question that I have a couple of questions, to be honest, off the back of that, is you mentioned custom earlier. So this is all built to them and to build. So I'm guessing that also links into the design process that you're mentioning, where it's really, really collaborative, where you're getting people on board. Is that how We Build AI started? Or did this, as you're going through the motions of working with clients, is this something that was then created off the back of this is how we should work, rather than the idea of how you wanted to work in the beginning?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel that what happened was there was almost like a eureka moment where we've gone from your traditional weeks of discovery workshop to get requirements, and then working out how we build that, and then working even more so then with engineers, just giving them user stories or text instructions ultimately, move to, hey, if I've got an idea and I can articulate that precisely and clearly, I can build something using these LLMs now, like Claude Code, relatively quickly. What that then meant was, if I can do that, how much does the SaaS model fully work for companies that might not need to buy hundreds and hundreds of licenses? And that's where the question for this particular engagement we're talking about came from, was 50 users, disparate spreadsheet, stuff being manually managed. Do we buy a Salesforce license for X amount a year, lock in, we don't get AI features unless you pay even more? Or do we build an underlying platform where we can use a capability from it for that and also have other use cases? And it turned out it was more cost effective to do the latter, and you're not tied into ongoing yearly license costs. So that was kind of the build or buy conversation coming in, where build was typically, it had more friction to enter. It took longer to do so. But in the AI native manner of delivering and how we did it with Spec-Driven development, that was now 3 months for a working customer relationship management tool. Onboarding to Salesforce would have been something similar. They were basically quoted, and they were like, well, let's try it. We could be in this new paradigm now, shift going on. I think that's the ethos behind what we're trying to build at We Build AI. It needs to be deliberate in what we're doing. You can build something, but does it make sense? Either the actual AI use case, or if you're building a custom app or a digital development, does it make sense from a business point of view? Just because you can do either one, how do you make sure the rationale behind it and the value is clear? Because yes, you might be able to build it in 3 months, but can you then maintain it? And there's a certain skill set that you need to do that, from platform engineering, AI engineering, software engineering, product management. Do you have that in-house? It's one thing to get it externally, but you don't want to be doing that long term. That's not cost effective, and that's not growing and sustainable for a business. So how do you have that transition and overall maintainability? That has to come into the equation too. And that's something which we spent a lot of time for. Is adoption is a delivery problem here, so that users are using it, so it justifies the cost in building it itself. But then also making sure we upscale knowledge transfer, strong documentation, which you can do really quickly now in an AI native manner, so that where you've got this solution, it can be maintained and built upon in future. So that's the ethos behind it. Is that what sparked what we had from We Build AI? I think that was one of the eureka moments. But part of that is always assessing what is the right outcome for the client. Just because you can do one or the other doesn't always necessarily mean you should. So that was...
Yeah, I think I've seen it on individual levels as well as company levels. I think a lot of the conversation around AI tends to move towards the Anthropics, the OpenAIs, the massive sort of tech players that are promising the world. When it comes to AI development, you'll have XYZ, we'll have AGI and all this sort of stuff, even though we don't really know what AGI would be. It's not a definitive term, and that's the sort of marketing sell of AI. But I think the real value is almost in the individual element, where it's the sort of democratization of what you can build, but also the process of building has changed. It's like you said, it's getting from A to B is no longer, we need to go out and hire a team of devs, and then there's a disconnect between sort of what you have an idea of and what the dev team is capable of building and what they've built before and all these sorts of things. Now the sort of lines are blurring, it seems like. But obviously you still need guidance within that process. The downside of that, and I'm wondering if you've seen this as well, is it's almost because of AI and all these elements, the sky's the limit. And then, like you said, those 50 ideas come into play, and it's almost about reining it in and focusing it down on this is what we need to do. I suppose, is there a process for how you figure that out, how a company figures that out? Because it's almost turning domain specialist knowledge into AI solutions that work.
Yeah. No, that's a really, really good call out. And that was something which, when I started doing this, I realized I could output 10 times more than I could 12 months before I started. And you feel very productive and you feel that you're getting a lot of great stuff out there, but there's still a decision that needs to be made. Someone still needs to review this, or we still need to use this or build from it. And then that's where the kill your darlings Stephen King quote, I think, is very, very important, because you're going to have a lot of stuff that you feel quite proud of. But right now, someone has to process that. You have to be kind to them in a cognitive way for them to be happy with what you're kind of proposing or recommending. So, and that's where the prioritization of what you're going to build is really important. Can you very clearly articulate why you've got this requirement and how it's going to improve either the user's experience or the process or drive more revenue or cut more costs, whatever that metric is that you're working at the top line? Can you say that? And if you've got 15 to 20 of them, how can you really say which ones are doing that? It's, from a scientific point of view, it's almost impossible to measure that. And so it's being very clear on that process. And that's what we're trying to do with this whole spec-driven development, is you have requirements that come in tied to some value, and how you then deliver that is the whole planning process behind it. So I've done a chunk of it myself where I'll work with, say, Claude, for example, and be like, look, we're just going to go into plan mode, which I think is a brilliant feature that Anthropic have rolled out in there. Let's just boil this down to what do we need to build in what sequence, but this is the value I'm going to have. Can we even build based on the highest value first? Are there going to be dependencies or things that come together? Because as soon as you've got 1 or 2 dependencies, it's manageable. When you've got 5 dependencies, because you've got 10 features, that's very, very complex very quickly. And it usually comes down to the tester to work that out. And so things can fall through the cracks. So if you're going to then release something with 10 features that you think is tested, but all of a sudden someone goes in and does what feels like a basic thing to them, and the thing breaks down, you've now got a solution that's got no credibility. And the adoption piece and getting them to use what you've just spent weeks or months building is already undermined in the first 5 minutes and playing around with it. And so this sort of AI native delivery allows you to go quickly, but also test and get feedback. And the real sticky point of that there is software development hasn't gone at that pace before. And some people's view on production grade then feels like, we do not spend 6 months hard testing this. Like, here's the evidence, we have tested it enough, but we're also not adding in all the bells and whistles from the get-go, because we know that can slow down adoption, bring in complexity that we don't need. And so what I found is, if we start with something that is a true MVP, minimal viable product, not just what everyone has thought they've wanted in the discovery session. Like, if you get this tool, system, product, does it drive some form of value for you? If they can say yes to that, that's our scope. That's not to say that's all you're getting, but you're going to get something a lot earlier, so you feel comfortable with it. And then what you drive as feedback is no longer a paper exercise. It's something which you're in the weeds of yourself doing, is in your process, is in what you do. And so when it comes to all these great ideas around everything that you can do, the proliferation of this stuff, that's how you manage it, I found, which is really tough, because you feel like you've had all of this year. Again, 50 ideas kind of related back to that, but only 2 or 3 is going to move the needle initially. And that's where you've got to work closely with the client or the users to go through that. That's what I'm finding is, that's where the true step up is.
Do they become more involved or more bought in the process because they're more involved? So if you're including stakeholders and including decision makers in the business, does that produce a better output purely because they are involved in the process, they are involved in the output there, and the value that's created from that, they have a hand in it, so therefore they'll want to use it. It's almost sort of teaching someone how to fish.
Yeah. Providing that you've demonstrated that you've listened to them. And I think that's where What I really like with this whole spec-driven approach and creating a proof of concept is really valuable, is you can show them something quickly. So if they've said, I don't know, we'd like to have this feature or we should change it in this way, if you can demonstrate that quickly, you really said, I've listened to you and I've understood what you said. Where in the past, it would, one, take longer, and two, it can be lost in translation between client, business analyst, developer, in the typical old way. And if that's been 2, 3, 4 weeks before, they've likely forgotten a little bit of their feedback, got a new idea, and also been like, well, will you really listen? Is it worth me actually coming to these sessions, giving up my time? And I found that having 1 or 2 kind of like power users or a dedicated SME who you feel like, look, your opinion is valued. We'd like to have a bit more time with you because we know that you're going to be a great user of this. That's really brought fruit because they gave him more feedback, and they're also like grabbing stuff off their colleagues. We found that does work. Not always, because sometimes you're in a small team. If there's just one person doing it, they're like, I just don't have the capacity, or they've been swamped in, so you have to find someone to substitute in. So that's where having a really good, I don't want to say top down, but more from, I guess, the manager or the director of that team. It's like, look, this is an important initiative, but it's only as good as the input we give this team that's building it for us. We need to co-create and author this together. That's you need that kind of that message and that buy-in, I feel, because otherwise it's like, here's another tool you're forcing upon me, which, yeah, apparently is going to solve all my problems, but I don't trust the input, and I sure as heck don't trust the output. I don't understand how this thing works.
But if they're included in the design process, they understand how it works, they can trust it a little bit more. And that comes down to the AI trust element, which is really important. I mean, I think we've mentioned it on previous podcast episodes. Probably deserves its own one, to be honest, because it's a whole unraveling of topic. I suppose then, I mean, speaking of trust, how do you, so when you're looking at regulated environments like finance, like healthcare or something along those lines, if you are building quicker and you're trying to create, sort of minimal viable products or, anything along those lines, how do you keep that sort of data secure? Because again, you want to move quickly so you can get value out of it, and the world has also shifted economically and behaviourally to wanting to be more cost effective and wanting to ensure you get value out of these sort of tech solutions if you are going to do them. I think everyone probably watching has felt that pain at some point where there's a tighter focus and also almost a tighter microscopic lens on the work that you do with this. So how do you protect the data? How do you make sure when you are trying to move quickly to get to that value, you don't break something, or you don't have a breach, or you don't do something that would come back to bite at the end of the day?
No, it's a super important question. There's 2 parts to that. The first one is adhering to the security posture of that organization. So we're doing something right now with another client who they want to create, it's a regulated submission for within energy. They have to submit to a regulator a project or an upgrade, usually around 70 pages long, everything that covers from the costs, the timeline, environmental considerations, stakeholders, all those sorts of items. And there's a legal and a regulatory viewpoint on there. So everything rolled up in one, great. One of the challenges with that is some of the data we're processing could be seen as strictly confidential. So you're now putting that information into an AI. So how do you demonstrate that you've got the security requirements in place to ensure that data isn't lost, it isn't leaked, any of those sorts of items? Because we're doing everything within, first of all, let's say a private network, you can only access this workload in this system on that client's own perimeter, their own infrastructure. First of all, there's already a very strong line of defense. You can then use things like single sign-on and Microsoft Authenticator as another layer. Then within the actual data and how it's stored, it should all be on their infrastructure and set up in the way which they usually have some practices and policies around it so that data leakage can't happen. So you can only use, say, Cosmos DB on Azure, for example, those sorts of things. That's all just the infrastructure tightening around it. Then you've got the AI and how does that interact with it. Ultimately, these LLMs, they're probabilistic. They do things on statistics. And so we bring in an element, particularly with the agentic workflows that we build. We have a lot of deterministic steps in there, which is basically programmatic. There's no AI, there's no magic going on. It's go to this area, pull this data, providing these clauses are met. And so that's where we can take that data, we index it so that it can be retrieved and understood by the LLM, but also set up in a way that when we pull into that first, we are using within, say, certain tables in that document, that's all just being populated in a rule-based manner. All the AI is doing at the end is just looking at it within this document and summarizing it afterwards. It's not actually processing all of that data. It's just seeing what is needed for that particular instance. And then within that itself, what we're doing to set up with it is the only thing then it gets relayed back up into the executive summary of that document. So it all lives within that document space. And these are all happening by inference. None of this is going to, so if we use an OpenAI model, none of that is leaving the enterprise to OpenAI or to Anthropic. It all stays within the ecosystem of that client or that organization. And that then allows for the data to stay secure and tight within the boundaries.
Does that mean you have to almost do a sort of diagnostic on those systems as well, on the existing infrastructure? Because obviously, if you are containing it in that bubble, but the bubble itself is flawed, then do you almost have to sort of do a diagnostic before you try and contain it in that way?
Yeah. So when I've been working with our platform engineers, all of that goes on. You can go onto the right click if you're on the browser, hit inspect tools, and you can see with the network traffic what's happening there. So that's how we would test things to understand. And they would usually point to some of the source items or areas that it's got. And then you would go on to in this instance, say Azure, go into the log analytics and have a look at the different metrics that's coming through with the telemetry of what's being worked, what's being used by the AI. So part of that you can follow, particularly using like your Langfuse or whatever, the items where you can follow the trace. What has the AI interacted with, from what source, how has it processed that? If it's a reasoning model, what has it thought through? And then what have you got at the end? So you can understand, has it succeeded or failed for whatever reason? One of the clients as well, they like to use a SEAM certified solution. I've forgotten off the top of my head what SEAM means, but it's basically for all the information that you process, is it being managed in a very high security manner? And you can do all the monitoring, the login, you can look at the evaluations and the metrics and ensure that it's responding how it should do from time, performance and otherwise. And then that allows you to point to, hey, we actioned this workflow, it populated this document with this information. Did it do it in the right way? Or if it failed, can we understand what the failure process or the reason for that was? So you can go and then find the root cause of that.
Which again is why the documentation element and sort of the audit trails are really, really important. I mean, you mentioned agentic workflows briefly then. I mean, that's been a talking point for a long time, for like the past year. It's been all talk about agents. Again, you're in a really good position to see what's actually being implemented in terms of agents. So I suppose in terms of actual workflows that are bringing value to organizations and things that you're even suggesting, and within that process that you describe, how are they different to just a normal chatbot, for example, and are they being used? I think there's a perception of everyone's using agents, everyone has to be using agents, but are they actually being used for proper business value, to gain proper business value? Yeah,
no, that makes sense. So the agentic workflows, we've set up about 12, 13 very specific ones for our client in the last few months. So to zoom out, what we interact with is a large language model. Takes your input, does some processing and gives you an output. Hey, who's the president of the US? And it thinks about that and it looks at its training weight and data.
Yeah, and the most likely answer to the question.
Exactly, the most likely answer. It's looking and it's doing some probability checks on what token should I give you next, and then it comes up with that. When you then give it a tool like web search, it becomes an agent. And so it can then say, hang on, I've been asked a question. It could be something about relevance. Let's now use the web search. So it wouldn't even use its data to give you the answer. It would do it to help understand what to do. And then it would look and it knows that. So that's now an agent because it's got tools. And it could have other stuff like access to spreadsheets or web crawlers and other tools. They're brilliant, but ultimately the net is really, really wide. So if you've got a business process or something you're trying to achieve, it's got quite a few steps in the process, and it uses very specific data or does specific actions, likely that agent's going to struggle. And so this is where agentic workflows come into the play, where we might have multiple steps or processes, maybe even multiple agents along that to carry out a particular action. And what we've done with a bunch of these workflows is probably have some of those, I mentioned, deterministic steps. So a very rule-based starting point to almost like point the agent where to go. And then we allow the agent to capture that information or that data to carry out the task, and then either output or hand it over to the next one. So one of the workflows we've got, well, there's two together. One is generation of a very complex competitive bid. So we give it the exam question, we give it the template that it needs to respond in. And what that then does, it looks and it parses and understands what those questions are. That's one agent. That then turns into almost like a checklist. What we can then say is, okay, based on this checklist, you might need certain information. And so that's then where it's probably given to a smaller model that can look at SharePoint, for example, and pull relevant documentation, because it's like, hey, I need to answer this question. I need data about us, otherwise it's just random. And then it can hand that information in a curated way to a drafting agent. And that's almost been told to act as like someone that does writing based on the questions that it's got. Then you've got this draft, and that's the output for one workflow, which you can take and you can edit and tweak yourself. But then you want to know if this is any good. And so there's a separate workflow that has a deterministic setup to look at the criteria and the conditions issued, say, by that particular operator. And it says in a lot of detail in a 200-page PDF, these are all the things we care about against costs, against schedule, against engineering, optioneering, all these aspects. And that then is pulled in as a guide for a reviewer agent to take that document, take the criteria, and then look at all the information across there. And then it uses a tool to look at the Word doc and to add inline comments. So it'll highlight the text like you would in the classic review changes in Microsoft Word and say, against this section, you are strong, low, adequate against the criteria for these reasons. And so you've used LLMs of different capability, depending on the speed and precision and reasoning that you need. And you've taken the actual rules and stuff that is actually pertinent to what you're trying to do. And then you've given that as an output. So the bid manager or the bid team can look at that. And they've got very clear feedback and steps they need to take. And that can run in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, because you're taking huge documents and giving it a very clear output. And that's what a more agentic workflow looks like, because it's doing multiple steps and very precise actions.
But again, it's different types of agents. And I almost sort of view it as, again, a weird imagery in my head is it's almost like a Swiss Army knife, where it has the capacity to do lots of different things, but really you want it to be doing one job at a time in a workflow like that. So it's obviously action based. So but then you tie it into other AI tools. I think the danger when people say agents is that you imagine, to use an example of someone in the previous podcast, Agent Smith from The Matrix or something, but it's like a fully sort of AGI level agent who's able to take multiple different actions. But that's not where agents are now. They're just very sort of specific, or they can be in certain ways, depending on what you're using. But the more they do, the more dangerous they become, in terms of, if that's fair to say, unless there's really clear rule-based operations happening, which is why you want those workflows.
You've got to have the guardrails in place to make sure what it's doing it's almost like the upside versus the downside. So if you go back to the data breach scenario, if you've got an agent that can go and look at everything. So one particular idea is, can I connect this to my email and Outlook? Okay, that's brilliant if you want to have a quick snapshot of, am I meeting the right different outside potential partners or individuals? Am I spending my time well? But the flip side of that is, what if that data then went out into the ether and you can see if a certain director or even executive is meeting with different individuals at different times?
Yeah.
So what is the pros and cons of doing that? And then within the guardrails, that's how much, because it's probabilistic, wide of a net do you want to give that? Or do you want to say, look, this is your lane to run in, or your domains that you get access to? So that's one way. What we also set up was, within all the firewalling and whitelisting, was because what we've done with the platform we set up was all within the infrastructure, and it's all private. You then have to whitelist to domains you can go outside to. So if you want to connect information from there, you can either use, let's say, like a web search tool, like SERP API or Tavily, those kind of tools, and that can go and look at the websites. But there might be some that you don't want it to access at all. It sometimes comes as custom with those tools. But there's some with the more deterministic steps. Just say, hey, just go and point directly to this particular website. And then it doesn't have that wide net to worry about. You've said you can go literally to just this one website and pull information from there.
Yeah.
And that allows the agent to be one, more accurate, but also two, less damaging.
So it's almost like a sort of data source of truth. You've got to make sure that what it's the data it's fed in order to do what it's trying to do is accurate, and also the rules you're giving it are based in accuracy as well.
Yes.
So it's almost like the design process for what this agentic workflow and what you want it to do, that is time intensive to a degree. But when the agent's set up and it's doing what it's doing, it then saves the time. Because like you said, you can do those bid writings in 10, 15 minutes, which would take usually a very long time to do. Months and months. So it's if you, and this is, I see a similar thing in what I do with executive search and recruitment. Again, typical recruiter shoehorning, hiring and executive searching. But again, where people go wrong when it comes to humans and hiring humans is typically they don't do enough work at the beginning. It's understanding why you need the person and success metrics for what you want from that hire. And so everything that precedes that is incorrect. So again, if you don't do enough work to set these agents up, it seems like you're sort of just setting them on a path to do something wrong, because they don't do something wrong naturally. They just follow the rules that they're given. So that's, I suppose, linking that to bad things that can happen. I mean, you must see a lot of blockers that happen within organizations when it comes to AI. So there's a reason everyone's not doing AI all of the time. And you know, if you were looking at actual percentages, there's probably actually a low percentage of companies that are actually doing AI compared to companies that aren't doing it at all. I suppose, from your perspective, what have you seen in terms of blockers when it comes to actually trying to produce AI, and maybe any advice about how to get around those?
Yeah, there's a few. I think organizations aren't yet ready for the pace that comes with AI native delivery, or what needs to come with AI systems. A typical example, we managed to build that relationship manager and those workflows in 3 months. This client, big, regulated, had to do compliance. We raised 120 tickets for support needed. In a 6 to 9 month period, that's manageable. In 3 months, that's an awful lot. But that's the process that they have in place to make sure things are governed well, audited, you've got the paper trail, and also because they've devolved power to different teams, because they're just so large at the scale. It meant that you're now knocking on a lot of doors to do what should be relatively trivial things. Whereas if you've got a much smaller company, probably that's just open and they can do whatever they want. So that's one thing, is just the organizational friction in the process that they got in place, which is good for governed software development, is quite challenging to move at the pace with AI native delivery.
So does that give an advantage to smaller companies?
It can do, yeah. The downside of that is, as a smaller company, maybe you've got less capital to throw at it. But if you're waiting on a 5-day ticket for another team, doesn't matter if you've got 10 engineers, you're still waiting 5 days. So it's how do we understand the processes around that? But then, as you're talking about the dangers that come with these solutions, we need to prove that they're not going to undermine or destroy the credibility and reputation of this big company. So I understand why these things are in place. So it's working out what that trade-off and that balance is. And it's good to see this organisation, they're thinking about responsible AI in there. So what things generally are challenging from a HR point of view or a data point of view, they're the ones we need to spend more time on. The ones that just give operational efficiency, where we're not really using too much of that sensitive data, let's just run with. So they're slowly coming on board to that. We still have to go by the committee point of view. The other one then is, we had those 50 ideas I was talking about at the beginning, going with the 3. Sometimes people will answer an easier question. And so they'll build something, which is quite simple, but has that done something to bring value? And so they'll build something quickly, but people aren't going to use it or adopt it. So that's a blocker.
It's an interesting one. I think, I mean, if we had more time, this would probably be a whole other podcast episode. But that is all the time that we have for now, unfortunately. Probably do a part 2, to be honest. There's a lot more to explore. I could probably ask you a lot more questions. But I suppose if anyone wants to follow the journey of We Build AI and yourself, where's best to direct them to?
So we've got a website. webuild-ai.com.
And LinkedIn as well.
And on LinkedIn, you can find us there. There's plenty of content we're putting out at the moment too.
And I'll link all that below. And if you have any questions for Josh, put them down in the comments. Drop me a message, whatever you want to do, and we can maybe even do a follow-up, again, another episode in the future. And we can cover all of those and potentially do anything else that anyone, maybe even do topic-specific episodes if enough people want us to talk about something specific. But
I'm happy to.
Thanks everyone for watching, and see you in the next one.
to analysts.